This is VOA News. I'm David Byrd. Hong Kong is bracing for another weekend of protests following months of unrest that have plunged the Chinese-ruled territory into chaos. On Friday, police defended their crowd control actions on Halloween. Kong King Wong is with the Hong Kong police.
We have spotted around 20 to 30 masked protesters in the vendetta mask, chanting slogans, and we cannot assure or we cannot confirm whether they are violent or not.
Riot police fired tear gas to break up crowds in the central business district and were heckled by revelers complaining that they were ruining the party spirit near the upmarket club district of Lan Kwai Fong on Thursday. That's the first time that district had been targeted. Thousands of protesters took to the streets of Baghdad again on Friday, confronting security forces, including on two bridges leading from the iconic Tahrir Square to the heavily fortified Green Zone. One woman died after being struck in the head with a tear gas canister. The Iraqi Human Rights Commission said more than 150 people were wounded when security forces opened fire with rubber bullets and tear gas. This month's protests in Iraq and other demonstrations in Lebanon are fueled by local grievances and are mainly directed at political elites. However, they also pose a challenge to Iran, which closely backs both governments. Security forces have killed at least 250 people in anti-government protests in the past month. For more on these stories and the rest of the day's news, be sure to log on to our website, voanews.com. You can also follow us on the VOA mobile app. This is VOA News. Former Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke is dropping out of the 2020 presidential campaign. AP's Mike Gracia reports.
Former U.S. Congressman Beto O'Rourke has dropped out of the 2020 Democratic presidential race. In a tweet Friday, O'Rourke said his campaign has always been about seeing clearly, speaking honestly, and acting decisively, adding, "In that spirit, I am announcing that my service to the country will not be as a candidate or as the nominee." O'Rourke tossed his hat into the ring in March amid much buzz after a narrow loss in Texas to incumbent U.S. Senator Ted Cruz. But in a crowded Democratic field, O'Rourke's campaign struggled to gain traction throughout the 2019 campaign season. Mike Gracia, Washington.
Turkey and Russia launched joint patrols on Friday in northeastern Syria under a deal that halted a Turkish offensive against Syrian Kurdish fighters who were forced to withdraw from the border area following Ankara's incursion. Reuters correspondent Emily Spickle has details.
A new military convoy rolling through northern Syria. These Turkish armoured vehicles are heading to join their Russian counterparts. Ground and air units are also involved in the patrol. Overnight, the Turkish Defence Ministry said Turkey had handed over 18 men to the Russians. It's believed they are Syrian government soldiers who were detained in Syria near the Turkish border this week. At one point, this would have been an unlikely alliance. Russia is the Syrian government's most powerful ally, while Turkey has long backed Syria's rebel fighters. The Turkish-Russian deal last week allowed Syrian government forces to move back into areas around the border that they hadn't been to for years.
Meanwhile, intense clashes were reported between Syrian Democratic Forces and Turkish-backed militants in the northeastern town of Tal Tamr. Spain has offered to host the next UN Global Climate Summit after the president of Chile said his country could not. AP's Charles de Ledesma reports.
UN Climate Chief Patricia Espinosa says officials have accepted Spain's offer to host the COP25 conference from December 2 to 13 in Madrid after previous host Chile pulled out at short notice. Chile's president couldn't as well proceed with a summit of Asia-Pacific leaders, saying he must instead focus on restoring security in his country, following weeks of protests in which at least a dozen people have died. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
And the UN's Migration Agency has called for the unconditional release of a female volunteer and 4-year-old child who were abducted in South Sudan Sunday morning. The woman and child were caught in a gun battle in which 3 IOM humanitarian workers were killed. I'm David Byrd, VOA News.